It is a pleasure to sit down today with former Republican presidential candidate, author, entrepreneur, and host of the Truth podcast, Vivek Ramaswamy. And Vivek, I know we were talking backstage. The first time I met you, it was shortly after you announced your presidential run in 2023. And since then, you've campaigned all over the country. You've made your case on the debate stage. You've competed in Iowa. You endorsed Trump. And now you have become one of his top supporters in his campaign for the White House. And now we're in Milwaukee, where Trump is poised to be the Republican nominee, and what feels like a historic and incredibly fraught moment. The country feels more divided than ever between red and blue, and Trump just survived an assassination attempt during the rally in Pennsylvania. So just to start our discussion, I wanted to get your thoughts on this moment that we're in and what just happened.
It was stunning on Saturday. I think it'll be one of those moments that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will read about in their history books. And I hope what they're saying then is that this was a moment when the United States of America turned a page from a toxic chapter in its national history. And that Donald Trump, when he went back for that second term, was ready to fight fire with water. Not fire with fire alone, but fire with water, and actually extinguish a lot of the difficulties that Biden claimed to want to address. He said he ran on a platform to unite the country. We wouldn't be where we are if he had done it. But blaming the other side, that's the easy path, to maybe take the path less traveled. And I think the path less traveled is to say, this is who we are and what we stand for. One of the things I saw during the campaign was that I do think this myth of national division is really just that. It's a myth, actually. When you travel to real America, not media, stock corridors, not political conferences, but real America, most Americans share the same basic values in common. And one of those values is, I miss this, but it's an America that I miss, where we can all get together at the dinner table, disagree vehemently, vigorously, debate each other hard, to say that I disagree like hell with you, but we will still be friends at the end of it. And I think that's an opportunity for both parties, but I'll speak for the Republican Party, to say, you know what, we are up against an ideology. We are in a war for the survival of the country, but the enemy in that war is an ideology, not our fellow citizens. The enemies are not Democrats. That we see our fellow neighbors as citizens while still engaging in that vigorous disagreement. And so if this is that kind of turning point, then let that at least be a silver lining out of what was a near national tragedy. And was a tragedy. One life was lost. It was a father of two kids. I'm a father of two sons myself. That was a travesty. But had that bullet taken a different path by a matter of centimeters, I don't think it would just be President Trump's life, but really the future of our country that we would be suffering. And so God has given that chance. It's up to us to step up and take it. And I hope people across the political spectrum do.
After the shooting, you had said, quote, first they sued him, then they prosecuted him, then they tried to take him off the ballot. The only thing more tragic than what just happened is that, if we're being honest, it wasn't totally a shock. Biden's inevitable ritual condemnation of political violence today, when it comes, will be insufficient and irrelevant. No amount of verbiage changes the toxic national climate that led to this tragedy. Why did you think that was an important message? And, you know, we're also hearing from Republicans that have placed the blame on President Biden and said that Democrats bear responsibility here for the attack. And there are lots of conspiracy theories going around on the internet. What is your response to people within your own party? And
so I'll say something about this, Meredith. I hope the national unity is the outcome that in the long run comes of this near tragedy. But it's not going to be a fake unity. And I don't want it to be a fake unity, because that's not going to last. My first response was anger. Anger because of what I wrote there, which is that actually the only thing worse than what happened was the fact that, if we're really being honest about it, was not a total shock to anybody, given where we are. So I think we have to be honest and recognize that we are angry, and for good reason, but to channel that anger for a productive purpose. It's got to be both of those things. We're not going to modulate. I don't think we should modulate on our principles that guide us. In the American Revolution, we're looking at an American flag here. It was fought for radical ideas of self-governance, of free speech. The idea that the people we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. those are radical ideals, and I don't think we should compromise on the ideals. But I think what we need to do better is instead separate our debates about that ideology, keep them as vigorous as they should be, to separate that from seeing our actual individual fellow Americans as anything other than our fellow citizens, and certainly not as our enemies. And I think we got to do both of those things at once, because the one risk is, of course, you kind of throw fuel on the fire and continue to inflame even worse in the future. God forbid. I hope that's the worst thing that happens this presidential cycle, is what happened on Saturday night. I think the other risk, though, is it ends up being this fake superficial moment that passes. I actually think that's the more likely risk. And I don't want it to be that. I want it to be a culture of continuing to be able to butt heads and do it vigorously without seeing the other individually as the enemy. I don't want to spend too much time bashing Democrats here in the spirit of what I just said. I think as it relates to Biden, he's in a bit of a tough spot, because his entire message has been centered on Trump's existential threat to democracy. And I think some of the histrionics around that have been unhelpful. Now, either what is he going to do? Either double down on that? I hope and expect he won't. But if not, there really isn't a campaign message. I think it would be better for the country if we had two presidential candidates, one for the Republicans, one for the Democrats, who were fully capable of leading this country, but had differing visions on policy. And we could actually have that debate as Americans. That could bring us together. But we don't control what the Democratic Party does. What I think we do control is what happens here. And I hope this Republican convention centers less on worrying about Democratic shenanigans and worrying more about who we are, not just as Republicans, but as Americans. And if we do that, I think not only are we going to be successful in November, I think we stand a good chance of, dare I say, reuniting the country.
We've heard from a lot of people that they've changed their speech for the RNC. Have you made any adjustments in light of what's happened?
So I tend to not give, as you probably know from my campaign trail, too many pre-scripted speeches anyway, but certainly Saturday changed my own attitude and perspective, absolutely. How could it not? I mean, think about if history had been written just a couple of centimeters differently, a couple milliseconds differently, what a different place we would be in right now. And as much as, and we do, mourn the loss of life that day, I think we can't sweep that under the rug. That was a tragedy. But as much as we mourn that loss, I am grateful that this country averted what could have been a true, lasting national disaster that we might not have recovered from, but that's not the world we're in. And so I do feel some sense of responsibility, having been given this chance. If divine providence extends America a hand, it's up to Americans to step up and actually seize it. And I think that's the moment we're in. And I know that Donald Trump is going to be up to that occasion. The fellow leaders across this convention who I've talked to already, I think, are in a place of deep reflection about the future of our country as well. I don't want it to be the fake unity. I don't want it to be just verbiage. I want us to stay every bit as committed to our own ideals as we were before Saturday, but to do it with the focus on what are we actually running to, not who are we trying to individually defeat out of existence.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I know we are all anticipating is Donald Trump to announce who his running mate will be. Right?
Apparently going to happen very soon, right?
Yes, yeah. Very soon. Right before we got on stage, I had some breaking news that Senator Marco Rubio and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum were both called and told that they will not be Trump's running mate. I wanted to know who you might be pulling for.
Well, look, I think that there were only 3 picks heading into this that were reported in the news. And so that leaves certainly my good friend, J.D. Vance. He's a good friend.
Yes.
He is somebody, so it hasn't been announced yet, so we'll see who it ends up being. But he's somebody I've known for over a decade. We were actually law school classmates. And funny enough, we bonded over watching Cincinnati Bengals games together. We grew up probably 10, 15 minutes from where I lived through the time I was in kindergarten. Wasn't far from where he grew up as well. And we didn't know each other then, but we got to be good friends in law school. And funny enough, though, that we were probably among the few lone conservatives there. We didn't even really know much about each other's political ideologies. We just knew that we were rooting for the failing Bengals, which was actually a good basis for a friendship. And then now here we are, you know, a little over 10 years later, and it's a different world that he and I are both in. I think he would be, we'll see what the announcement is, but I think he would be an excellent vice president to President Trump. And I just think we need more people like that in our politics, who are energetic intelligent, but also have a clear-eyed ideology. I think it's a good thing, actually. He's one of the few people in American politics who has a clear vision of why he's there and a sense of mission and a positive ideology for the future of the country, and I respect that, and I think he'll be missed where he is now in the Senate, where I think we need more of those fighters, but I think he will make for an outstanding vice president.
So if it is Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, the governor gets to appoint the replacement, and so far we've heard that Governor Mike DeWine's office he's declined to weigh in on what factors would drive his decision making, which leads me to you. You're from Ohio. You are around the same age as J.D. Vance. As you said, you went to school with him. You're both young for the MAGA movement. Would you be interested in taking Vance's spot in the Senate?
So look, as I said, I think JD is going to be a great vice president. One of the only real negative of choosing him as vice president, and I mean this as a compliment to him, is that he does leave in his wake a big vacuum in the Senate. I think we need more people like him in American politics. President Trump and I have had some great conversations about the future. We've talked about a wide range of possibilities of how I could have an impact on the country. But if asked to serve in that role, if JD is indeed the vice president, we're going a couple steps ahead here. We don't know who
I know.
is yet. But if JD is selected as the vice president, I think he would be a great choice. And if I were asked to serve, then I would strongly consider it. And I would want to have an open conversation with President Trump about where I would be able to have the biggest impact on helping the country. And so that's what my off-the-cuff response would be.
Have you had any conversations with Trump or with Governor DeWine about potentially filling that role?
No.
None at all?
Not broadly, no, certainly not about that role. I think that broadly, the conversations with President Trump that I have had is mostly related to ways that he and I both want to change the country for the better. I do believe that we have a historic opportunity to fix the immigration issue in this country once and for all. That's something I was incredibly passionate about in the presidential campaign. As the kid of legal immigrants, I also believe in the rule of law, and the mass wave of illegal immigration is as much the problem as it is a long-run fix that we require in our immigration system. At the same time, probably my top passion and focus during the presidential campaign and even afterwards has been to shut down the fourth branch of government, the administrative state that wields far too much power today. Now, there are elements to doing that. That's a multimodal effort. Some of that is going to come from the executive branch. Some of that is going to need to be groundwork laid from Capitol Hill as well in changing the way the budgeting process works, what sort of authorities the president does or doesn't have to spend the money that has necessarily been appropriated for different departments. So that's really my passion going forward, is really tackling that administrative bureaucracy, the managerial class in the three-letter government agencies. I think there are ways to do that through the executive branch, and I think that there are necessary ways that are going to be required to do that through Congress and through the Senate as well. And so for me, I'm going to keep an open mind, but in terms of issues that I'm foremost focused on, it is to not reshape the administrative state, but really to dismantle the administrative state. And I think that's going to be something that unites Americans on the left and right, to say that no matter who you vote for, it should at least be the people who we vote for who actually run the government, not unelected bureaucrats.
That's been something that's been talked about in Project 2025, the right-wing playbook curated by the Heritage Foundation that a lot of Trump associates have been a part of. It's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of criticism, of course, from Democrats and from President Biden. And a CNN review last week found at least 140 people who worked in the Trump administration have had a hand in crafting this. Trump says he has no idea who's behind the plan, but I am curious what you make of Project 2025 and some of the policy prescriptions that have been put forward there.
I care less about labels or which groups are doing what. I like to get my hands into the content of what a given policy is, agree or not. And the parts of Project 2025 and the parts of other efforts too. There have been a lot of efforts, not just in the last few years, but dating back decades. There are other parallel policy think tanks that have been focused on this issue too. But anybody who is focused on deconstructing the managerial bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, the regulatory state, the idea that you have unelected bureaucrats who are issuing binding edicts that were never voted for by the actual people of this country, I think it's a good development. One of the things that's different now from Trump's first term, and Trump won on the first term with a drain the swamp message, and for good reason. But one of the things that's different now from 2017 is we also have a Supreme Court constitutional backdrop that actually would allow a willing president to go much further than he might have been able to go 10 years ago in dismantling the power of that bureaucracy. West Virginia versus EPA in 2022. I personally think it's one of the most important Supreme Court cases of our lifetime that say that certain of these regulations are inherently unconstitutional if they relate to major policy questions. You have Loper, you have Jarkissi, both from this cycle in the Supreme Court. That is a major legal toolkit that gives the executive, the President of the United States, great authority to rein in the power of the executive. And this is where I think some of the media reporting on this has missed the plot, frankly. They worry in some of the media histrionics, if I'm being honest, about concentrating power in the executive. Whereas in fact, the real problem is the overconcentration of power in the executive branch, in the administrative state. So a lot of these efforts that we're talking about at deconstructing the administrative state, it's not about concentrating executive authority. It's about giving back executive authority to the people of the country and say that Congress should actually be the one making the laws. There's a distance that the president can go. There's also going to be necessary action on this required of Capitol Hill. Congressmen and senators stepping up to that challenge and frankly taking more responsibility for writing those laws. Part of what we've seen is an abdication of that duty, where a lot of legislators, congressmen and senators in both parties included, saying, okay, I don't want to get into those details because I might be held politically accountable, so I'm going to write a vague statute and kick it over to the administrative state. That's wrong and a big contributor to the problem as well. So again, that's the top problem I'm focused on in a lot of my scholarship. I have a book coming out later this year. Part of the book tackles this topic. And whether it's through the executive branch or another way, that is something that I intend to remain focused on. I think will be positive for the revival of our country.
So what role would that be, though?
Yeah.
What would that look like in
Well, look, as I said, there's a lot of possibilities, and let's even, there's a lot that's going to play out even in the coming hours, if not the coming days. And so, look, I intend to have an open conversation with President Trump. We've discussed a lot of possibilities, and whatever it is, my litmus test is going to be what allows me to have maximal positive impact on this country. I don't come from the world of politics. I come from the world of business, but one of the lessons I did learn very early on, and that stuck with me, and that I share with young people who've asked for advice as well, is it takes about as much effort to do something really small and do it well as it does to do something big and to do it well. And so in the short time that we're given, I would rather focus on whatever the biggest challenges that I'm able to take on and have an impact on using my own skill sets to help save the country. That's what I'm interested in. But for me right now, my top passion and area of interest is really taking aim at dismantling that fourth branch of government, the regulatory state, the overgrowth of the administrative state. There are some other individual policy issues that are near and dear to my heart, like the immigration issue, and those are important to me as well. But my top area of focus is how do we actually restore self-governance by dismantling the regulatory state.
Would you be interested in a cabinet position in a second Trump administration?
I would consider a wide range of, President Trump and I have had a wide range of conversations, and whether it's going into the administration, you raised on late-breaking possibilities, other avenues. Look, I do think that JD's seat will leave big shoes to be filled, and I think that senators like him are rare to come by, so we'll see what the next few days hold in store. But regardless, I'm less focused on what individual title I have or position I fill, and more maximizing the biggest impact I can have on what I call shutting it down. We can't, and this is an interesting, maybe to get a little bit less about me and my position, but more on the future direction of the country and even the conservative movement. This is going to be one of those decisions we're going to have to make as a movement in terms of which way we lean. I think with President Trump's nomination on Thursday, that marks the end of if it didn't already, end of an era in the conservative movement that rejects, I think, a lot of the neoliberal dogmas of maximizing the size of the economic pie for its own sake without regard to other factors like national identity and the prosperity of American workers and manufacturers and our national interests and our foreign policy. But in the question of where we go from here, I think there's a tilt that could go in a national protectionist direction that says, hey, we want to use the regulatory state to do good, to advance the interests of American workers and manufacturers, rather than the neoliberal dogmas of yesterday. That's, I think, one direction things could go. I think there's another direction that says, you know what? The right answer is not to redirect the regulatory state. The right answer is actually to shut it down. And that's what I call more of a national libertarian view. And I think there's room for both of those in the America First movement. I think both of those exist within the America First movement today. But certainly my view is that the more we go in that direction of shutting down and dismantling the nanny state, we're not trying to create a conservative alternative to the nanny state. We want to dismantle the nanny state. We don't want to create a conservative alternative to the current regulatory state. We want to dismantle the regulatory state. That's, I think, more the direction we need to go. That's certainly one of the things that animated my candidacy, and even after my candidacy for president, when I think about having an impact on the country, that's the direction I would like to take things, whether that's from within the executive branch, whether it's from the Senate, whether it's from a different vantage point, even at the state level. You could think about this too. The fourth branch of government is alive and well, unfortunately, in nearly every state government across the nation as well. And so that's what I believe, is that's how we save the country from the overgrowth of managerial bureaucracy, of unelected bureaucrats issuing public policy by fiat. And however I'm able to maximize my impact on that, that's what I think the next step holds in store.
What if some of the ideas for you Trump has had?
Yeah, I want to be respectful of the conversations I've had with him. One of the things I love about Donald Trump, and I am wired the same way, is we're very candid, right? We don't play coy. And I think that even on policy questions, right? He and I discussed shortly after I exited the race the reason for being opposed to a central bank digital currency. His first words to me were not what many politicians would say if you talk about a seemingly esoteric issue like that, which is pretending to know what they're talking about there. He said, what the hell is that? And why are they for it? Which is a good question to ask, because he didn't want to just take my opposition for it. He said, well, why are the people who are for it? And eventually he, through the course of a week of studying this issue, by the end of that week, came out publicly with a position that he adopted publicly on stage in New Hampshire, said that I'm opposed to the creation of a central bank digital currency in the United States, because I think it's a threat to the liberty of Americans. And that really gave me a lens into President Trump that I didn't have from the media impressions of him, or even the short interactions we would have had beforehand, where I do think this is a man who cares about the best ideas actually winning for the country. This is a man who actually cares about not just covering his own issues, but learning ever more about how he's going to help make America great again. I think he means it when he says it. And so most of our discussions have actually been on substance. I'll often share my perspectives with him on either policy or on the vision for the country. And I think he has alluded to a lot of different avenues that he sees, and we're going to continue that conversation.
Well, I was just informed that while we were sitting here, Donald Trump has picked Senator J.D. Vance.
You kidding me? Right here? Okay.
As vice president. right now, while we are sitting
here. Is that
here.
right? There it is. I see it. Well, I'm glad to see it. I actually messaged JD earlier today offering him. It sounded like the winds were pointing in that direction.
Yes.
And I had offered him my preliminary congratulations, and I think he will be an outstanding vice president, actually. I think he's not going to be a good vice president, he's going to be an outstanding vice president. I think President Trump and our country will be lucky to have him. I will certainly do everything in my power to make sure the Trump-Vance ticket is successful. I want to think about this, but I'm inclined to say this could be the single most formidable political ticket in my lifetime. And I want to see them succeed at a scale that not only makes the Republican Party thrive, but makes the country thrive. And I think we need more people like JD in American politics. So I'm very happy for him and excited for everything that's ahead. And it's funny to me, just reacting to the news in real time and thinking about the context in which he and I knew each other, both Cincinnatians, Southwest Ohio natives, and both people who, did through different journeys. We were classmates in law school. Never imagined that this is where he and I would both be. We were reminiscing on that a little bit, and here we are, just a little over 10 years later. And I am very proud of him and his whole family. Usha is a good friend of Apurva's and mine as well, and the way they're raising their boys, and our boys are similar age, is just something that gives me great happiness to see him hopefully impact this country as much as I know he can.
How did Vance respond when you texted him this morning?
We have a very friendly relationship.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about him is he's not he's not like a lot of other politicians, right? We're able to really, there's not a lot of formality between us.
We've known each other for a
Yeah, we know each other
Right.
really well, but I think he's that way even with people he works with in the other contexts, and I'm kind of wired similarly as well, is let's just take the artifice off a little bit. He and I have our shades of, differences in vision for the country, and I love that we're actually able to talk about that with each other and push each other. He's pushed me and I pushed him in some ways that allow us, I think, to each be the sharpest versions of ourselves, and I just think we need more of that in American politics. Of course, we agree on most things, but actually the stuff we end up talking about is areas where we actually have daylight between us, and I just think bringing that thoughtful culture into our politics is going to be great now, not just at the level of the Senate, but the near highest level of office in the United States, and I think he's going to be an outstanding vice president. I really do.
What does he bring to the ticket as a vice president?
Well, I mean, I'm not a political analyst, so I'm not. I leave that to the professionals. But I think President Trump made a smart choice where, a choice like JD, I think he makes that. Certainly, my opinion is that the reason to pick JD is he would be an excellent vice president, and God forbid if that moment necessitates itself, an excellent president. I really do think he would make a good president and leader of the country. But I think politically, just to state the obvious, he is somebody who is an American dream story. That's very personal to me. My parents came here as immigrants over 40 years ago with no money. I've founded multi-billion-dollar companies, married my wife, who's lived her own version of the American dream. JD's wife has lived a similar American dream to my wife, and JD didn't come from standard political means or business backgrounds, and yet has succeeded at the highest levels in this country. That's awesome, right? That is an American dream that isn't alive and well in this country right now to a lot of Americans. It's alive and hanging on for life support. And I just think that he is somebody who embodies that that's still possible in the United States of America. And I think our message as a party, I think President Trump's message, I think a lot of JD's message is that we want to make that possible for more Americans, more attainable for hardworking people who play by the rules and get ahead the right way, to be able to live a good life with dignity and with respect and without condescension. And I think that that's something intangible he brings to the ticket that you're not going to necessarily see in some sort of analysis that here's the voting block he brings along. But in terms of the overall character of his own story and his own journey, but to combine that with an authentic message that he delivers as well as the best of them, I think that is going to be a real value add to the ticket to win in November. And I hope and expect an even greater value add to leading the country as a vice president.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we will wrap up today's Politico CNN grill. Vivek, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And any, message to your friend as he's about to...
To JD?
Yeah.
What will I say? You're a hell of a father. You're a good friend. And if you're as good of a vice president as you are a father to your kids, a husband to your wife, and a senator representing our state, then our country is going to be better off for it. And I wish you well. So proud of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good
Thanks.
to see you.
Good
Thank
to see you too.